Welcome to class. We had a pass first lesson, but thanks for joining us. Hope to see a lot more of you this quarter. I'm Joe Felcher, I'm one of the co-instructors, and I just want to first start off by thanking Ernestine for building this course and developing it to. How many years have we doing it now?
I guess we started in 2016 before the stack was hot.
Before it was cool, right? And then Ernestine and I go way back, along with Steve Blank, to early days we started a course called Hacking for Defense, which some of you know about, and we'll maybe talk about that a bit more. Steve Blank's in the back there. But I'm going to just kick off with a quick intro, which is kind of awkward. It's here with Steve Blank and Steve Bowsher and even Ernestine, folks who really have lived this topic. But you may notice a few gray hairs on me. I'm going to talk about how did we win the Cold War? How did we prevail in previous competitions like that? When defense and national security relevant technologies, where do they come from? They were really originated in big government labs and big primes, if you will. And to stay competitive, if the United States kind of developed incrementally better, large and exquisite systems like aircraft carriers, submarines, fighter jets, just a little bit better version every 10 years or so, we could be competitive and we could prevail. And in the end, for a lot of reasons, to include our defense competitiveness, we prevailed in the Cold War. A couple guys may remember that. Sorry about that. Not many of you do, right? The Cold War is like, the Civil War, World War I, just one of those ancient things, right? It was pretty significant. But we are, again, in a competition that's going to define the future world order, and things are very different. Back in the Cold War, these brilliant people like you, some of you actually wanted to go work for the NSA and other three-letter agencies and the government because you were just that smart, and that was just the place where folks like you could go and self-actualize. So it was a different time. So fast forward to today, we are in a fight for the future of the world order. And where is the defense and national security relevant technologies coming from? Unlike, decades ago when I was getting commissioned in the military, those technologies, think about them: AI, cyber, quantum, all those technologies. They come from the commercial technology base, and the advances in those technologies. They're not driven by government directives like they were in the past, but by consumer demand. It's changed everything. Really, it's a paradigm shift. So now the challenge, if we want to be competitive and make sure that our vision for the future of the world order is realized and not the alternatives, we're going to have to find ways to identify and adopt and deploy those commercial technologies at speed and scale for the benefit of our national security. I say our, I know we're not all U.S. citizens here, but apologies for that. So that's a real challenge. And where are those technologies coming from? Well, hence a lot of them are coming from right here and within a couple of miles of here. And they're coming from all over, but this course called the Silicon Valley and the U.S. government, is really talking about that. And I have a national security defense background, so we're a lot broader than that. And Ernestine and Steve and our co-instructor Steve Blank out there. Yeah, actually, just quickly, we've got Ernestine, Steve Bowsher, Steve Blank. Any other co-instructors I'm forgetting? Okay.
Your role.
So I'm running introduction here, but all the co-instructors are just amazing. Maybe me less so, but. Really, you can have a great experience here and get a lot of perspectives here. But yeah, I'm Joe Felcher. I spent a long time in the military, some time in the Defense Department. I founded a center here along with Steve Blank called the Gordy Knott Center for National Security Innovation. If you're actually an enrolled Stanford student, please take one of our classes. We're Hacking for Defense now. We got a class called Technology Innovation and Great Power Competition in the fall. We support Ernestine's great effort here with Silicon Valley and the U.S. government and establish a new course in the winter called Innovation or Entrepreneurship Inside Government, which our colleague, Dr. Eric Volmar, has developed. So please get involved with us. I'll talk more about that. Shamelessly, we want to get behind Stanford students, help empower them to get involved in national security, and would love to follow up with all of you. But back to the topic, again, commercial technology, that's it's more than an opportunity for profit. It's going to be required for us to develop and deploy this for the purpose of national security. And I think our competition with China and to some degree Russia, it's going to be determined in the coming years, and a lot of it's going to be decided on how we are able to, again, identify, adopt, and deploy those technologies. So this course is about that and more, but we have an amazing panel here of venture capitalists that Ernestine's going to lead it, or Steve and Ernestine are going to lead a discussion on. But again, I talk about this. Steve Bowsher's way ahead. In-Q-Tel, if you know about that, they got the message decades ago, and they've been part of the solution. Finally, the rest of the country's catching up with organizations like Defense Innovation Unit and a lot of our accelerators like AFWorks, SoftWorks, NavalX, and others. But at least I think the good news is there's a recognition of the challenge that we have and what we need to do, but there's a lot more work to be done. A lot of it starts with getting and inspiring our best and brightest so they don't go off. Nothing wrong with going off to Google and Facebook and all the great companies around here, but please, if you can leave this course in this quarter and maybe inspired to find a way to contribute and get involved, our country needs you, and I know that's a shamelessly American thing to say, but hopefully we'll get back to the place where the U.S. represents a shared vision for the future, and as we have for many, many years, and hopefully we'll continue to do so. But thanks for being here. It says a lot about you and the fact that you care, and it's going to be a great quarter. And I'll turn it over to Ernestine to kick us off for lesson 1, but thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. So welcome. So today's session to kick off is a venture capital panel. So I'll be the moderator today, and joining me here today are 3 incredible VCs who've been investing in defense tech and technology innovation that affects national security. As Joe alluded to, Steve Bowsher over here is CEO and president of In-Q-Tel, strategic venture fund for the intelligence community. Steve's been a pillar of In-Q-Tel for nearly 2+ decades now, and In-Q-Tel has invested in some of the most well-known companies in the industry, Palantir, Anduril Industries, a number of others. Greg Sands here, he's managing partner of Costanoa Ventures. Costanoa is a venture fund that he founded in 2012. One of the firm's standout defense tech investments that we know here on Stanford campus is Vannevar Labs. In fact, the founders of Vannevar worked out of Greg's office as they were just getting started. Rich Boyle here, Canaan Partners. I particularly admire Rich's investments in robotics. He is an investor in Berkshire Grey as one example, and he's also an investor, of course, in the defense tech hypersonics company Hermeus. So thank you all for joining us here today. So whether it's hypersonics, robotics, space, autonomy, cybersecurity, everyone here has invested in founders and companies that are building products and technologies that are critical to national security today. Why don't we start by diving into more of your personal journeys into the sector? You've all been investing in Silicon Valley for decades. Greg, you were at Sutter Hill before starting Costanoa. Rich, you were at Khosla. Steve, you were also at an institutional venture fund prior to joining In-Q-Tel. What was the moment that led to your interest and conviction in investing in defense tech?
Sure. So I'm happy to go first. I was so in the era of deep learning, right? So AI came out of the a 25-year nuclear winter, and we were looking around for applications of what then was often called AI/ML, but basically machine learning, advanced machine learning. And we're doing a bunch of work in autonomy. Now, at the time, we were investing out of a $175 million fund, now $275 million. And so investing in things like, Zoox, autonomous vehicle companies didn't seem like it was plausible given fund size. And we looked a bunch at robotics, didn't actually think that it was the right place for us. And the very first thing I did is a software company called Tyrian. It's an open source operating system for drones and robots. It actually came out of ETH in Switzerland, so the dominant open source software for drones called PX4. And that was very much a dual use theory. Now, again, post the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that has become principally a defense company. And it was a year after that actually Steve called me and said, Brett Granberg, formerly of In-Q-Tel, is now a first year at the GSB, and he's amazing, and you should meet with him. And by the time that happened, then I was just off to the races. And on one hand, the other thing I'll say is I actually have a political science undergrad. So during most of my tenure, I've been trying to overcome my educational background, without having all of the technical underpinnings. And now the policy world and the technology world have come back around. So it's a great fit for me, and has so really starting in 2018, we've been focused on it.
Yeah, so the roots go deep. So first of all, I'm an electrical engineer from Stanford. Those of you that know Fred Terman, I mean, he's the father of Silicon Valley, but he made his bones at the radiation lab at MIT during World War II, developing defense tech, and brought that ethos, I think, to Stanford's engineering foundation in many ways. And on a personal level, I lived for a couple of years at China Lake when my dad was in the US Air Force doing research on radar systems at China Lake. So I've kind of grown up around it to some degree. But for me as an investor, where it really kind of began, robotics a little bit. So at Canaan Partners, we've been around for 38 years as a firm. We were the original GE Ventures and spun out of GE in the 1980s and had roots in doing things around aerospace all the way back then. So there's a lot that predates me. I've been at the firm for about 9 years. We've been in existence for about 40. But we've done a lot of things in space and aerospace in particular. So one of the companies was in the portfolio when I joined is a company called Skybox, small sat sensing. And we've done a lot in space and aerospace since then around satellites. The hypersonic jet company that I'm on the board of is truly an outlier, but we're covering a lot. We're a generalist firm. We do early stage deals in cybersecurity, companies like Dragos that secures critical infrastructure, a company called Sapphire, which is basically battery tech to secure your lithium ion batteries if they're in kinetic environments that may get busted up and you don't want them to have runaway thermal events, interesting stuff like that. Robots is an area where I'm spending a lot of time. So companies like Field.ai, they're trying to build mobile autonomous robots, a number of which are used in defense-oriented applications. So covering a lot of different territory in the space.
So for me, it's actually pretty practical. Greg and I got into the venture business at the same time, right at the end of '98, beginning of 1999, which, if you know your venture history, is sort of the tail end of one of the big bull markets fueled by the dot-com explosion. And my advice to you, if you're thinking about jobs or career in venture, is the end of a bull market is a great time to get a job because venture firms are raising money and they're expanding their teams. But it's a tough time to keep your job because what happens is the bull market ends pretty quickly. And so in 2001, the market had crashed and the dot-com industry went away. And so these same venture firms that were hiring young guys, and believe it or not, Greg and I were once young, into their firms were now sort of thinking, hey, we need to shrink, and we need to fire some people on our teams here. So, Greg was a better investor than I am. I'm sure he wasn't worried about keeping his job, but I was. And so I started to think, all right, what can I do to differentiate myself in the venture business that would make my firm want to keep me and allow me to be more successful as an investor? And I thought to my roots, which was I'd grown up in Washington, D.C. with my dad working for the government, and I knew that the government spent a lot of money on technology products and services, and yet it was never the first vertical market of any company I ever looked at. And I figured if I could sort of figure that out in some form or another, that would be a sort of interesting niche to carve out for myself as I was thinking about building my career in the venture business. And so I surveyed the portfolio's CEOs that I was working with at that time, and one of them raised his hand and said, yeah, I think we could sell product to the US government, let's go to DC. So we went on a series of trips to DC to figure this out and met In-Q-Tel during those visits, and In-Q-Tel was actually going to invest in the next round of the company that I was working with, round of financing, when instead we sold it to Intel Corporation and made a little money. But along that way, that's how In-Q-Tel discovered who I was, and so they came to me and sort of said, hey, Steve, would you be interested in joining In-Q-Tel and leading our investment team? And for me, it was an opportunity to bring both parts of my life together, part of growing up in DC and the part of working with startup companies since 1992 in some form or another here in Silicon Valley. And so that's how I ended up in the defense tech business.
Very cool. What sectors are you all excited about these days, just within national security? Where do you see the most promising opportunities right now?
AI everywhere is the general answer, but then when you sort of go deeper, I mean, I personally am spending a lot of time in robotics, as I mentioned, and the use cases are all over the place, from assembly to putting things out in the field to just, there's a whole bunch of things that are enabled by the latest generation of AI software. That's been an investment thesis for us that we've been pursuing for the last probably 7-8 years. Cybersecurity is a really interesting one. How do you secure AI models has become a recent thing, and we've made a couple of early stage investments in that domain and using AI almost offensively. So thinking about white hat hacking that's enabled by AI, so you can do it at scale to automate certain things that are very manual and very repetitive, and it's tough to cover the surface area. So a lot of that type of stuff is where we're spending time. So robotics and cybersecurity, and then in the space domain, We're in Kepler with Greg, for example, that's trying to build a data infrastructure for satellites in space, so it's easier to get the data back down. And we're doing quite a bit of things in the sensors and information processing that are space-based is an area where we're spending a lot of time, and a lot of that is being driven by the availability of sensor-based data from space processed through AI models to do something interesting for people. This weather modeling company that I'm on the board of is a good example. They've got a proprietary satellite constellation, not because they want expensive satellites, but all of that data feeds into their AI models to build better worldwide weather models. And the US Air Force is one of their largest customers, because getting good data around the world is a huge problem for them.
It's such a world of opportunity. I mean, there's so much that needs to be built. So just for a little bit of context, in addition to the companies I've mentioned, we've got the 2 satellite constellations, both Kepler Communications and then Muon Space, which is basically about the Earth observation, the other type of satellite constellation, and that's a Stanford team. It's actually part of the founding team from Skybox, right? Actually, Dan Birkenstock, who teaches on campus, is the one who introduced me to Johnny Dyer. But yes, we've got applied AI for aviation, autonomy, where the early customers are, basically, government customers in the Air Force and Special Operations. We've got AI software actually for law enforcement, which is usually state and local, but not federal, and a critical element of public safety. We've done a fair amount. Was your other class that Jeff Cole is coming to? Is that right? Not here?
This one.
Oh, it is this one. Okay, yeah, great. So we're investors in Hidden Level, which is an amazing system. Both you can think of it as counter drone strategy, but it's really airspace and radio spectrum management. So we continue to look in and around electronic warfare. I think that's awfully interesting. We like space domain awareness a lot. That's a complicated space. Actually, I like marine domain awareness almost more than space domain awareness, which is just because space is so freaking hard. And at the same time, sometimes you come across founders that lead you to extraordinary things. So one of the board members of Vanavar, he spent 8 years leading the business unit at Palantir focused on the intelligence community, basically realized that our competitors were hacking our telecom networks and not only exposing the lives of our service member and intelligence community, but able to aggregate it to understand what was happening. And so he has built this extraordinary private and secure mobile virtual network operator called CAPE, which is the Navy is deployed on Guam and is planning to roll out in other places. So it's an amazing variety of applications of the modern technology stack to all of these problems.
So I think both Rich and Greg hit on a number of great areas. The one that I would add that, cyber wasn't mentioned, and cyber is sort of always a steady market for us in this area. But the point I guess I want to make is I've fought a losing battle about the title defense tech, because I think it's too constraining a title for where I think we're all investing in. I prefer to think of it as global security investing, in part because the area that I'm going to describe is the Americanization of the supply chain. I think that's a huge opportunity for investors right now, regardless of what you think about the tariff announcement and tariff strategy that the current administration is pursuing. There's no question that the U.S. government is going to look to source more and more components of more and more products, finished products that they purchase within the United States. And so I think there's opportunities to extract new ways to extract minerals and materials out of the ground. There's new ways of manufacturing, primarily leveraging robotics. There's new ways to compile and assemble those things here in the U.S. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, and it's going to be a huge shift of spend from money being sent to companies outside the U.S. To companies inside the U.S. And that's always, when there's a huge shift in disruption in how billions of dollars of money is spent, that's always a great opportunity for entrepreneurs and for venture capitalists.
So within these areas, why don't we talk a little bit about hardware versus software? So traditionally, DoD has been known to purchase hardware systems with some software attached to it. There's a push, whether it materializes or not, towards more software. How do you guys think about investing in hardware versus software today?
Maybe I'll go first and make Rich go first every time. I just finished a stint as a commissioner with the Atlanta Council on an effort that we produced, a report called the Software to Define Modern Warfare, which is, I think, representative of where the Department of Defense is going. You're right, the Department of Defense procurement system is built to purchase hardware. It's built to planes and tanks and ships and subs and things like that, and munitions. It's not built to purchase software, but as we all know, software is defining every piece of hardware we're using in our day-to-day lives. A Tesla car is basically a huge piece of software with a hardware wrapper around it, and that's the way that the defense world is going as well. That being said, procurement is still playing catch up, right? And so there's still, the DoD is still more comfortable, and there's more ways to sell hardware products than software. But if you look at Anduril, for example, the innovations that Anduril is really developing is on the software side, the autonomy side, the way they integrate and fuse sensor technology. I think that's where the real innovation is going in the future. But the government still likes to buy hardware, and I'm a co-investor with Rich in Hermeus, the company you mentioned earlier, is the hypersonic drone company, and there's still going to be lots of opportunities as well. So I think you're going to see a mix, the government buying a mix of both, but software is really increasing in terms of its where it stands in the value stack.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting transition, because I think
On one hand, Silicon Valley, including really, Mike Brown when he was running DIU, beating the drum on, buying software. And again, I would say outside of national security, we are principally a software investor. And so, for example, I do think Vannevar cut some new territory, right? You had to be comfortable, at seed stage, right? 2 people and 20 PowerPoint slides, with some go-to-market motions that were not very well established and not very well known for buying software. And that's a bet that played out well. I think in the case of CAPE, for example, there were some real restrictions around the ability to buy cell phone minutes. Right, which is, you can think of as kind of a form of software, certainly it's services. And so when we said yes, I would say that go-to-market plan was the least credible of anything that we've ever actually invested in, but we thought that John would likely figure something out, and it's gone extraordinarily well. I think in the case of Auterion, it is interesting because on one hand, it is clearly right that if all of this stuff needs to be coordinated, then it isn't all going to come, if you think about all the drones. And just take drones as a simple example, right? If you've got fixed wing, quadcopter, vertical takeoff and landing, you need them in small, medium, large, so you've got 9 boxes. What are the odds that one company is the best at all 9 at all times? And on the other hand, you've got 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds who you got to train on one piece of software. You can't train them on a new piece of software every time. Like, it has to be the way that it works, but the government is still used to buying hardware. And I think the Anduril founders, if I'm not mistaken, said explicitly, look, we wanted to be a software company. Yeah. At the time, we didn't think it was possible. We had to wrap it in metal. Right. And so they built a hardware company and then have migrated back to being a software company over a decade.
Yeah. So one of the other things that the Anduril founders are known for is saying that it doesn't work to be dual use as a company. They're only focused on defense. What are your thoughts in terms of dual use, which is targeting both defense and commercial sectors at the same time versus defense only?
I'm happy to check on that. Yeah. Almost everything we've done that has defense applications is dual use. So I guess I'm disagreeing. Yeah. Good example, Tomorrow I/O, the satellite weather modeling company, the Air Force is their single biggest customer, but they're not anywhere near the majority of revenue. They do a lot with commercial enterprises as well. And that's how we think about the world. I think in the defense-related markets, you can very often find some very good use cases that help initiate a business and bootstrap a business. The battery technology company I mentioned before, that's I think a good one. The company's called Sapphire. It's technology about securing these kind of large format lithium-ion batteries, and there's some really high priority use cases that are affiliated with, Defense Department type situations. But that is absolutely relevant for electric cars as well. And so we think of it as being a great use case initially that will lead to then bigger markets on the commercial side. And I do think you can do both.
Steve, do you have thoughts on this, given that you've invested in both dual use companies and defense only?
The vast majority of investments we make are dual use. Anduril and Palantir are certainly the two most prominent companies we've invested in, but even Palantir is now 50-50 commercial and government. Look, the Department of Defense is a large, profitable, and somewhat arrogant customer, and they're used to people coming in and sort of saying, what do you want, what do you need, we will build it custom for you, and so, when the founders of Anduril say that, they're sort of playing, I think, to their customer who wants to hear that they are special and unique and different, and, everything's about them. So that's good business practice, to make your customer feel special. But I personally think that if the requirements are the same for what you're building on both the commercial and the government side, it's great to be dual use. If the requirements are different, yes, in your early stage you should build one product, and you need to figure out what market and what set of requirements you're trying to solve for when you build that product, and then you may have time in the future to go build a second product. So I agree with that part of it, but I think there's lots of use cases and lots of problems that go across both government and commercial that companies can build for at the same time.
So, it's interesting. We've been willing to do both.
Vannevar is defense only, right? And I think, and there are people who come out of government and are probably smarter people than me, but who say that they'll only dual use. And we've been willing to do both. But like Steve, I grew up in product management, and you got to build one product. Right? In the early days, you got to build one product, and you got to know who your ideal customer profile is. And the Defense Department and any commercial organization don't fit within the same ICP. So you got to do one until you get to the point where you have some amount of mass, and you've got enough muscle mass that you can start working on a second customer group and a second customer profile.
Yeah. So Greg, maybe we could touch upon how you evaluate founders, and specifically evaluating founders that have to sell into government. What do you look for? What are some of the characteristics that you're looking for specifically for these types of companies?
We all have probably
Slightly different, but not all that different views on what makes a great founder. For me, I look for this internal source of drive, look for an intellectual curiosity that leads them to just continue asking why and why and why and pulling threads, which includes curiosity about customers and why they want what they want and how to go make that happen. And then, just incredible judgment, because you're always making decisions in the fog of war. So that's my general answer. The thing that I think is unique in the national security environment, and I very intentionally also refer to it as national security, not defense tech, because I do think it's broader than that, is have to have domain experience. And some of which is these problems are buried beneath the surface and very hard to discover on your own. Have to have certain amount of customer access. So for example, the Vannevar folks were able to, Nini came out of the intelligence community, and Brett was Army and then worked at In-Q-Tel. They got to sit down with customers, right? And to me, again, former product manager, customer discovery is how you figure out what to build. The idea that you're going to build something for Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines by sitting in your office in Palo Alto without talking to anybody, I just don't believe it, right? And then have to be, I'll say, have to be a learning machine. So in some ways, I think among the most extraordinary accomplishments I've seen is Nini Hamrick, co-founder of Vannevar, who runs the whole go-to-market effort. And she had never worked outside of the intelligence community before showing up at Stanford and being a co-founder of the company. And she has architected the whole go-to-market, and it has worked flawlessly, and she's brilliant. but because she's a learning machine, right? And it's so anyway, that's my core list.
Yeah. Rich, maybe we can talk more about this go-to-market that Greg is alluding to. Government's known to be challenging to work with. The acquisition process is known to be lengthy. There's the Valley of Death that we often refer to. How do you think about whether a startup you're investing in can successfully cross that Valley of Death?
So I think Greg hit on a really essential point, which is the notion that somebody in the founding team, if they don't have direct experience in understanding how to navigate that, you're going to have a huge problem. I mean, if you're talking about building something like Hermeus and you don't understand what a program of record is and what you're aiming for and you'd be amazed at how many people are trying to pitch technology related to national security that don't understand those types of things and don't know that they don't know it. And that's just a huge red flag. But the learning rate comment ties into that, which is I don't mind working with founders that maybe realize that's a gap and they know how to recruit the right people to help fill that gap. But there's a skill set about navigating that. I've been interacting with some of those conversations as a board member investor for quite a few years now, and I still don't understand a lot of the subtleties and complexities and how you have to marshal multiple different points of access and buy off before you even get to the decision maker, and then there's another lever. It's just incredibly complex. And I think it's a really tough thing to learn on the fly. And so in the time frames that a startup works on. So if you've never done it before, and you've never had any exposure to that before, and if you want to be a founder in that domain, I would encourage you very, very strongly to find some people that can coach you through that process, because the complexity is off the charts.
Steve, maybe we can talk about exits in the space. We've talked a little bit about that. You and I have talked a little bit about that. Like, what are your thoughts in terms of a few years from now? How many primes are we going to see? New primes are we going to see? How do you think VCs should think about constructing their portfolios when it comes to investing in the space? What's kind of your prediction on the future here?
Yeah, so I think that's the big question in the space right now. So maybe a little history for people to frame my answer. In 2006, I joined In-Q-Tel and immediately started getting calls from top-tier venture capitalists about Palantir. And they'd say, look, we've met the team. They're pretty impressive. The tech clearly is impressive, but we just don't understand this market, Steve. Help us understand this market, because we're trying to figure out if we want to bring this to our full partnership. And I did my best, but apparently I failed, because none of those firms ever pulled the trigger on investing in Palantir. And I wasn't as close to SpaceX, but there was a similar, I think, experience going on at SpaceX in terms of how they were raising money, which is why when you look at SpaceX and Palantir, they were funded by very non-traditional investors in a non-traditional, right, yeah, exactly. So fast forward 10 years to 2016, all of a sudden, if you looked at the top 5 most highly valued private companies in the world, 2 of them were SpaceX and Palantir, 2 companies selling to the government. Just the types of companies that make the venture capital ecosystem work, because they were returning multiple times the fund, for their early stage investors. And so, if I have one criticism in the venture capital industry that I've been a part of for a long time is, there's a little bit of groupthink that goes on in the industry, but they all sort of looked at themselves and said, wow, we missed it, we got to get in. So now if you look at Defense Tech 2.0, right, starting in 2016, you had Anduril and Vannevar Labs and Skydio and Shield AI and a number of other companies in this space sort of start. Now they're getting invested in by these top tier great investors, and they look more like a traditional venture-backed startup company in terms of what their cap table looks like and who their investors are and that sort of stuff. But the venture capital industry is a hits-driven industry. The numbers are very clear. 10% of your deals will generate 70% of your returns. That's the way the industry works. And the question I have is, will that hold in the defense tech, or will it even be more concentrated? Will it be 10% of the returns generate 80 or 90% of the returns? And so, to your specific question, right, there are 5 primes. We started out with like 10 or 12 after the last dinner, and then gradually consolidated down over the years here. And you can call Palantir and SpaceX in some ways, sort of new primes. And from that 2016 generation of companies, I think you'll see 1 or 2 emerge. And then and you'll probably see one or two companies emerge from the set of companies that have been invested in the last couple of years, as well. But if that's all there is, I'm not sure that success is broad enough to generate the types of returns across the venture capital cohort that's been investing in defense tech for the last several years to really make them want to continue to invest in this space. Now, along the way, these companies are going to buy other companies, right? And the venture capital industry is full of success of companies that have exited through M&A. So there may very well be enough exits through that to sustain it or not. But the Defense Department likes to buy from a small number of vendors and spend a lot of money with them. I'm just not so in a much more concentrated way than the commercial market does, or the Fortune 1000 does, in terms of buying their software products. So I'm just not sure if this is going to play out to be as an attractive of a market for venture capital to invest against as everyone believes right now. It may, and I hope it does, because I've dedicated my life to it. So, or at least the last 18 years. So. I'm hoping it's good for everybody. But I think that's the key question that we need to see the next couple of cards turn over and play. The good news is the fundamentals are still there. This administration is continuing the shift of shifting, again, billions of dollars of spend from, a small number of defense contractors to, at least now a small but hopefully a growing number of emerging commercial tech companies that are all funded by us. And if that continues to happen, I think there'll be great investment opportunities here. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Greg, what are your thoughts on valuations these days, given what Steve just shared? Anduril closing around right now at $30 billion. Shield AI just closed at, I believe, $5 billion. I'm seeing a number of early stage companies raising at like 30, 40 million with no product in defense tech. Like, what are your thoughts on these valuations?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenging environment in that regard. And on one hand, you'd look at it and you say, oh, Anduril is just about, on that list of primes. They're probably the next one, right, after Palantir. And on the other hand, $30 billion market cap is pretty heady territory, right? When people are expecting to make 2.5 or 3 or 4 or 5 times their money from there. So it's interesting. I'm an early stage person, and so I tend to think, my margin of safety is that we're investing so early that if you actually, build a company, there's plenty of room for, to have really successful companies. And so those high late stage valuations make me really nervous. On the other hand, look, I get it. I talked to, including Professor Amy Ziegard on campus, and she's like, I don't know, all this money coming into defense tech, and I just don't know how people are going to make money. And it is true that, the big existing primes have not bought much of consequence, right? Sometimes that's the way incumbent companies transform their business. And SpaceX, Anduril, and Palantir haven't made big acquisitions of private companies. So when I look top down and think, we end up with 12 or 15 primes and those are the only people who can buy things, and eventually nobody else can get big enough to go public, I think that's this period of defense tech investing won't look very good. On the other hand, when I look and bottoms up and I see all the needs, and I ask whether the existing set of companies are going to fill those needs, and there's just not a chance. And so I just kind of avert my gaze from the top-down thinking and look at the needs. But there's a real question.
Yeah. Rich, any thoughts on where we are in the hype curve?
I think we're in the thick of it right now. Most of what I'm looking at related to this space, probably the most active areas in robotics as an example. And that, yes, to your point, I'm seeing a lot of seed deals with very strong technical teams raising $40 million that haven't built anything. And to me, that is, and they're all hand wavy around, we're going to build foundation models, kind of the equivalent of LLMs for robotics. And somebody will, and somebody's going to build a really amazing company. I've seen 10 teams saying they're going to do exactly that in the last 6 months. And so
they're all raising like $25 million in there.
Out of the gate, and they haven't delivered anything yet. And that's super scary to me, but it's definitely indicative of a, hype cycle. If not at the peak, it's definitely up there pretty far. But the flip side is, to Greg's point, you dig in deep, and there's some amazing people building really incredible technology. And so you try to find the ones that you think you can back. You try to find a disciplined entry point as an investor that feel like you've got room to run. And there are deals to be had out there. The signal to noise ratio is kind of wacky right now. It takes a lot of work to figure out something you've got conviction in. And you have to go deep enough on the technology to see that there's something real there. It's not just a fancy pitch. So the opportunities are definitely there. I think the applications, to your point, are absolutely there. Yes, there's a lot of noise in the market, and that's our jobs as investors to hopefully make wise choices there. But it's not easy right now, for sure.
Why don't we wrap with just final words of advice for our founders in the room looking to build in national security? Steve, why don't we start with you? And then
Sure, I'd come back to something maybe Greg said earlier, which is I think the biggest challenge building a company in the servicing the Department of Defense and the intel agencies is distinguishing signal from noise in what the requirements are for that first product that you build. It is really hard to get to the true end users in these agencies or in DoD and understand what the real problems are. And there's lots of people along the way that you're going to meet that think they know what the answers are and are going to give you a description of what the problem is, and can send you off in the wrong direction towards it. So that's my biggest piece of advice: is really make sure that you're getting to the right set of end users, the people that are going to use the product that you're going to build, that are giving you clear understanding of what their problems are, and make sure, again, the next thing you have to make sure of it is that there's enough of those people actually out there in the market to make a big enough market to go to be profitable to go pursue. But the mistake I make is lots of people who are talking to people in the government think that they're talking to the right people and hearing the requirements that they're going to build, and they go off and build the wrong product.
Greg?
I agree with all that. I mean, I think problem finding and customer discovery are the central part of any of this, and I think things like hacking for defense and In-Q-Tel and DIU are access points to. But if you're founding a company, I've seen a couple examples, but not very many, of people that found their way there without one or more co-founders or really close advisors who have been in the field with the technology. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, and Vannevar had this experience, and Brett's written about it. He wrote a great piece on building for defense. Is yes, you've got to get to what you think is the end user, and you also then have to understand that the end user is often not the economic buyer. That person is in the field, within an operational unit, but ultimately then it needs to bubble up to a more senior official and then migrate across to the program management organization in the Pentagon that is actually spending real money. And so, you just, I think, have to throw yourself into it. You have to get to the end user, but you also need to understand, what Rich was talking about earlier, that you need an operational user and you need the program office to get anywhere at all. And just, you got to be a learning machine and start thinking about those things from the beginning, even as you're just building prototypes and showing them to users.
What I would probably emphasize about all of that, and what I think underlies all of that, is time. And I spent most of my career actually as an operator at startups, worked for 25 years at startups before moving into venture, and you're sort of an eternal optimist if you're starting a company. That's the nature of the beast. But even in the commercial markets, you usually underestimate how long it's going to take you to do something. I think that is 10x worse in anything related to selling into the government, national security related. And so I think where I feel like the failure mode that I've seen most is people don't plan enough for having the resources and the time to cross that valley of death that Ernestine was talking about. And it's a huge problem that leads to all kinds of badness. So just think carefully about how do you understand all of that, about understanding the customer, understanding the use case, understanding who the buyer is going to be, what that process is all going to be, and how long it's going to take you to get through, because it's really complex.
On the other hand, so we don't end on a downer, I will say building a company that's on a mission is an absolutely extraordinary thing, right? You can pull together a team, you can pull together talent, you can get a group of people that are trying to take on the biggest challenges in the world and build something extraordinary. So I think if you pick something that you're really inspired by, then you can transform yourself into an extraordinary leader and do something great.
Steve Blank, why don't you wrap us up with a few more positive insights so we don't wrap on a downer?
Well, here's the positive insight. They came with bags of money. We should all be excited that these are VCs who are spending their capital to fund you guys. Anybody want to start a company in the defense space? Anybody? Did anybody maybe think about doing that? Well, there we go.
Okay.
So don't let them leave. If you're a real entrepreneur, they would not leave this room without you, and they're going to be trying to run out, and you're going to be trying to catch them. So the good news, there are a couple of really interesting messages, and plus one overlay I want to try on you guys, is that defense venture spending at scale is just kind of a new thing. I mean, some of you've been playing for a while in individual pieces, but at scale of calling about defense, it's not that we've been doing this for the 35, 40 years we've been doing venture capital. Defense is really kind of a new thing. And so people are trying to figure out from the venture capital part, I'm glad we're putting money in, but we're still trying to figure out if we get money at scale out, like social media or other places that we've invested in. Fair statement?
Absolutely.
The second part is, and for anybody been in a large company at all, had a real job outside the startup world? So everything you know about a large company has nothing to do with the Department of Defense. It's a really big idea. And for those of you who ever sold into a large enterprise, every skill you've learned is wrong. It's wrong because the DoD, it's not because you're dumb or the DoD is dumb, but they operate with different rules. And for example, how they buy things, what they call acquisition, is a very different model than having a purchasing agent or somebody else or a rational process. So you need to relearn everything about selling and how people buy. Number two is they live in one place. Most of it is Washington, D.C. And if you're in Silicon Valley, you think, well, I could start a tech company here and I'll hire somebody who will sit in D.C. Maybe, but your business is going to be there. I just happen to personally think if the CEO is not where their business is, certainly for the first year and a half, you've just made it harder. But the key idea is it is a very different space. You can learn it, but you need to understand, you need to be able to go to a whiteboard and understand what's a PPE, what's a program executive office, how's the money allocated, what's the difference, as you said, between the end user, which might be a warfighter or stakeholder, with the 14 other people in that chain between you and a large order. And the successful portfolio companies they've been referring to are the ones that not just had a great shiny object, but figured out that entire stack with this shorthand called the go-to-market strategy. Is that once I found somebody who might care about something or a problem to solve that matches what I think I could build, they figured out the complexity of how to transfer money from them to their company. Is that correct,
Yeah.
guys? The thing I will observe and want to try on you is a framework. It turns out I tend to believe in this old model McKinsey came up with, the 3 horizons model of innovation. Horizon 1 says, are you building something that people already use or buy or know about and you're going to make better or cheaper? That's a Horizon 1 innovation. In the Department of Defense, there's probably a budget for that. There's probably a PEO office. There are probably people, if you showed them this and whatever, they'd know what it was. That's one type of sale. But imagine you've created anti-gravity, right? The things that Steve Bowsher's customers have asked him to fund. Well, those might be disruptive innovations, but there's no existing home for those things. And that's a very different sale and model. But the problem is if you've hired traditional salespeople and marketing people who think that you have a Horizon 1 sale, it's an impedance mismatch and you might as well throw your sales and marketing dollars in the middle of the street and set it on fire. Does that make sense for you guys?
Yep.
So the first thing is you need a framework in your own head. Am I creating something that if I show to people, they go, oh, we know what that is. There's an existing vendor, Collins already makes a radio, but you've got a better radio or maybe something else, and now you're competing, but people will know what it is. Gee, I can make space lasers hit whatever and whatever, it never existed before, might be important, but you're going to have to create that requirement somewhere in the DoD to get people to ask for this so the money flows. This might be a little complicated, but understand the distinction, especially in an organization that has 3 million people in it. 3 million people, 75 program executive offices, you know, $500 billion of acquisition dollars, meaning money they spend, and you trying to figure out your way in. The other thing that you mentioned implicitly is, and all my students, when I teach Hacking for Defense, ask, well, how do we go figure out who to call on? Now think about how silly that is. Here it is, 6 people are trying to figure out a 3 million person organization, rather than that 3 million person organization having 10,000 people trying to help us figure out how to connect with it. And it was because of how they started this conversation. The DoD historically was selling to existing contractors for the last 50 or 75 years. Their prime contractors, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, Huntington Ingalls, et cetera, the whole laundry list, because those were called the primes. These were the people who provided major weapon systems to the DoD. The good news is the new names you've heard, SpaceX, Palantir, Vanderveer Labs, Arconic, others, are potentially the new generation of primes. But the DoD was not organized to buy from this new generation, and they had to fight their way in. They've made potentially life easier for you if you want to build a defense company. And these guys have made your life easier for you to help do that, but just understand the system, except for small corners, are still not organized to want startups in. Pieces do, but the whole system is still designed to deal with the large contractors. It's going to get better, and it's going to get better faster, particularly in this administration, but before we break a lot of things, but it will get better for the country. Gentlemen, did I miss anything that you said?
Oh, sounds good.
Yeah,
Yeah?
I think that's a good summary, Steve.
And you should understand, seriously, these guys are looking for you. If you haven't thought about starting a company in this space and taking the things you've learned at Stanford and figuring out there might be a huge market for it, there is money and interest in all of Silicon Valley of funding new and interesting things, because the government has become an interesting customer. You know, SpaceX, Palantir, Arconic, who else? Who are some of the other big, the next primes? Who would you say next prime?
Probably
Vanderveer,
Anduril,
Anduril is the obvious one,
Right.
yeah.
Right? So, anybody ever see the consolidation map of prime contractors? Go Google that. There was a map of, like, there used to be 100 contractors who sold to the DoD. And in the last 30 years, there's now like 12. And what I used to tell the Assistant Secretary of Defense when she visited, that our goal should have been to flip that diagram horizontally and say, okay, well, now we need to create the next 100 and actively create an ecosystem. You guys are going to be, along with these guys, the beginning of that next generation of ecosystem. So thank you, gentlemen, for helping us start the next generation of primes. And hopefully we're looking at people in this room who will do that.